let's continue looking at aspects of love as you're explaining in your book, Unconditional Love Is, Appreciating Aspects of Life. And amongst all the different aspects that you're explaining in your book, I'm picking out one at the moment which I thought was particularly interesting. It's detachment. And I suppose at first one might say, well, surely love is all about attachment, not detachment. So there's obviously going to be something in here that's going to be somewhat different from what I think I might have expected. Let me read out the few paragraphs that you've written about detachment, and let's pick out the things that you're explaining. Loving our creations gives them and us the ability to become more. Naturally, when we hold tightly to anything through fear of loss or attachment, we lose the opportunity to truly experience their precious gifts. Whether people or things, ideas or feelings, we can cherish and enjoy all creation and also release it to expand to a higher expression. Detachment is the way to experience life to its fullest. When we detach from our need to hold on, we allow the beauty of our reality to unfold and serve us through love. We no longer place limits, opinions, or conditions on the things and people about us. Living in the current moment, we enjoy all expressions just as they are. Unconditional love is detachment. Loving unconditionally is the ultimate detachment and the ultimate treasure. So, is this thing about letting go?
Letting go and being present in the moment. Obviously something we refer to frequently over these various qualities is the present moment, the current moment. The more we can understand ourselves in relationship to now, the point of power where we're physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually capable of making decisions and having experiences, the present moment is a key factor for understanding detachment, because the past is the past, the future will take care of itself. The quality of detachment is so vibrationally connected to the whole idea of unconditional love, the whole understanding, the whole experience of unconditional love, because they're quite synonymous in the sense that as we are unconditional with our thoughts and feelings and views on the world, the quality of detachment is really the piece that helps us kind of identify, recognize, and more practically align ourselves with unconditional love. And detachment being quality that we're singling out here is a way to kind of help us move into greater vibration of unconditional love, because we can kind of go through our daily life, our daily routines, and say, well, how can I detach? How can I let go? And I'd start with really the things in our lives, and perhaps one of the reasons why I found detachment such an interesting experience early on, before I kind of delved quite deeply into the whole experience and understanding and realization of unconditional love, is attachment was one of those founding pieces that I could start working with in my day-to-day life, and found fascinating results by detaching. And from my memory's sake, I grew up in a household where there was like the classic set of perfect holiday dishes. And that classic set of perfect holiday dishes were only brought out on a couple of occasions. And they were treated and handled with great care, and then put away again. And, not to be touched, not to be looked at, not to be handled, not to be used. And when I came across this idea of detachment, this example along so many was that what was the purpose of holding on to these special dishes for these few occasions, rather than actually enjoying them all year long and having the fullness of the experience? Especially when I kind of contemplated the whole idea is that, even when they were brought out, there was a tendency for a piece or two to break in the process of being used or washed or what have you. And then coupled with, a similar experience where there was a collection of books that were, supposed to go on a beautiful bookshelf in some imaginative, library in the house at some point, which never materialized. And during this time period, these books that were so coveted as being a part of, a sense of knowledge wealth, perhaps financial wealth, they were stored in a place where, in that same time period where they weren't being used, weren't being read, weren't being accessed, they disintegrated from the heat and humidity. So they became worthless. They served no function. And I took kind of these childhood experiences and I looked at so many aspects of my life, and I realized that the people, places, and things in our life are meant to be experienced in the present moment. And the fullness of that experience is when we are detached from all of our associations, our beliefs, our holding on dearly to some image or some idea of what these people, places, and things represent to us. And I found that when I could detach my attachment to these people, places, and things, I was actually able to enjoy all of them more fully and more in the present moment. And so detachment became a real fundamental beginning point to explore and understand unconditional love, as a place to start with some of the physical things that were around me, and of course physical and somewhat, intangible experiences of relationships and friendships, that if I let people be who they were, that I could actually experience more of them because I wasn't trying to make them behave according to what I thought they should behave. And then, of course, as we say with all of these qualities, it had a lot to do with my own inner detachment too, my detachment to what I thought I should be. Some of the profound changes, some of the reasons why I've come to do what I'm doing and, say, write books and various other things that I've gotten involved with, never in my wildest imaginations early on did I expect to be doing any of these things, because I had more or less an attachment to what I thought were the appropriate outcomes of my life, my career path, my activity. And again, as we've mentioned in other experiences, qualities of love, that these attachments are often based upon other people's suggestions, traditions, beliefs, obligations. Quite a bit of extraneous activity goes on with why we become attached to things in the first place. And part of going within and recognizing unconditional love is to go in and begin to sort out some of these notions, ideas, ideals, concepts, attachments, as we often call them, as a way to say, well, what is my real association with these people, places, and things? And when we begin to ask that question, and we begin to come from the standpoint of the intention of greater and greater freedom, greater and greater detachment, we begin to find more of who we are in relationship to the things around us, rather than who we think we are, or worse yet, in a way, who we think we're supposed to be in relationship to all these things. So it's quite intertwined and interconnected, and at times kind of interdependent, because we are so steeped in, especially in the Western world, very much steeped into our material belongings. And material belongings also, in most cultures, also include relationships. Friendships, community, the associations we're in, we really do travel with quite a bit of preconceived notion of what it's supposed to look like, how we're supposed to act, how other people are supposed to act. And for this particular path to explore unconditional love, detachment is a great way to begin to recognize the just huge volume of attachments we have placed upon people, places, and things, and that if we begin the process of detaching in each of these circumstances, we actually find greater and greater freedom to love both ourselves and these people, places, and things around us more unconditionally. So detachment is a I would almost say in this instance, a great tool. It's a great place to begin to think and feel differently about our relationship as we travel through life.
Kind of reminds me of something I heard a long time ago, which was, you can have it when you no longer want it. And it's almost as if when you've detached from the desire for something, something happens. But it always occurred to me, well, if I don't want it, why would I want it in my life? If I'm detached from something, surely I lose interest in it. Where does, you say that it opens the, I can't remember the exact words you used, but it opens the path to love, I think. something like that, you were saying. Why? I mean, how does that happen?
Well, if you think about when we're attached to, or when we place upon, uh, the things that we perceive we own, which let's just contemplate that for a moment. What do we actually own? I mean, things come into our lives for a season and for a time, and everything passes on, transitions on at some point, whether in our lifetime or another. Especially with things are constantly evolving, and especially in our material goods, you know, everything has the potential and quite honestly the possibility, probability that will break down or break apart. And then even with the things that we do have, say China, for example, I mean, it's very easy to drop a piece of China and there it goes. That's the end of it in that particular form. So when we are caught up in our attachments, we tend to be so exclusive with what we have and act as if we are actual owners, like this is our property. We actually attach value to it. We attach uh, affirmation. We attach, some kind of sense of our worthiness to these outer items, and that's both physical and also kind of relationships. We think we have the perfect relationship or the perfect career, the perfect friends, whatever it is, and we place on those, attachments. We're really creating quite a filter and a barrier to the actual experience. Mm-hmm. Taking the example of the china, hidden up in the cupboard, we're only able to use those with our belief systems a couple times a year, and then we have to be super careful, which means we can't really enjoy them. Mm-hmm. And we're not really participating with them. Whereas if we make them an everyday part of our life, because we're not attached to the outcome, we're not attached to them being in our lives, and we actually understand, and I love this particular word, we are caretakers of the items in our life. Mm-hmm. And really, in a way, the people, places, and circumstances, experiences, because we walk during our lives and things are constantly in a sense of change. The challenge is our psyche likes to hold on to things as kind of a security blanket. It says, well, I'm known by this, I'm attached to this. Mm-hmm. Which, of course, as you said, like eventually we will detach from these things, because we will outgrow them, tire of them, and change into something else. Part of the manifestation process that you're talking about is that generally when we want something dearly, we tend to repel it rather than bring it into our lives. Mm-hmm. It's not until we actually let go of it that it can come. But even when it does come, if we reattach ourselves to an identity with the people, place, or thing, then we've limited again our experience. Mm-hmm. If we look at it from the standpoint that we're constantly layering and kind of like, take that the metaphor of like heaping each belief system, each like identity, like, say if our car, we think the car brings us prestige. Well, that's like throwing a big heavy coat over the car. And if we think the car, gives us some virility, we throw another big heavy coat over the car. And everything that we do, that we attach ourselves to some form of an identity, a projection of our worthiness, that somehow we're identifying with the object. We are literally like throwing big heavy winter coats over it and obscuring the actual experience. Mm-hmm. And then, particularly in those cases, we tend to interact with our objects and then also our relationships, because they really are, I refer them because the similarity is this, is the same, whether it's a material object or a person that we're interacting with. We're not trying to say, a live person is somehow the same as an inanimate object. What we're actually talking about in the sense of attachment is the projections we place upon both the inanimate object and the relationship, where we kind of assume an identity or place upon these experiences an identity that is not true. It's just something we want to say, like, as we're walking down, the mallway with our perfect spouse, we want everybody to see that we have the perfect spouse. Mm-hmm. Well, that's a projection. That's not enjoying the person just for who they are. Or we can say the same thing as we're driving down the street. We want everybody to identify with what we consider the perfect car. That's our projection. We're identifying with the material aspect or the material object. We're adding to it something that is just an idea that is not necessarily the experience of the person, place, or thing. Mm-hmm. When we take off these layers, when we take off these heavy winter coats, we take off these belief systems, then we can have more of a direct, true, honest relationship with the person, place, or thing. We can allow it to be what it is, not what we try to make it to be. And of course, as I say that, projecting outwardly, all these same things totally refer to our inner world too, because we are attached to what we think. We are attached to our knowledge, we're attached to our poverty, we're attached to our opulence, we're attached to, the way we think we're supposed to project ourselves in the world, the perfect size, shape, or the lack of all those things, because that's an attachment too. When we go to the negative side, when we criticize ourselves for this, that, or the other, we are attaching ourselves to these critical elements. And none of that reveals the fullness of love. You need to remove that in order to get love peace.
Still not very clear about why it is that detachment really does open to the fullness of love. I mean, I can understand how attachment has an element of fear to it, because it's a fear of loss.
That's a good point.
Of
yes.
self-identity and loss of security, as you say. And so the opposite of attachment being detachment suggests then the opposite of fear, which is love. But I'm still not very sure about how it is that detachment, in a kind of positive sense, opens the way to love.
Well, let's go, because you mentioned the opposite of fear would be love. I would actually say the opposite of fear, there isn't, because it's really, fear is not in opposition to love. Love is the universal peace. And let's just say, in this case, let's take love to a broader definition of unconditional love. The unconditional love is to be unlimited, without limits, without attachments to the past and even the present and the future, which means if we want to experience more love, to have more of this love that is innate within us be revealed, then we need to perceive life with fewer attachments, fewer limitations. And every time we place something upon something else, as a projection or as an idea, we are attaching ourselves to that particular piece, which limits our experience by that same particular piece. If we detach from those pieces, we live more unlimited. That fewer limits means we're going to have less fear, because attachments also create fear. They create doubt. We're afraid we're going to lose something. If we're afraid we're going to lose it, we probably will, because we're creating that very intention, that attachment, which will cause it at some point to break apart, fall apart, leave. Whereas if we don't place that upon it, we don't care any longer whether it's there in our lives or not in our lives. We're really in a very neutral space. At that point, detachment eventually moves into that unlimited space where we are the detached nature. Is a neutral nature. We are then free to actually experience the fullness. Well, in each of these experiences is the nature of love innate in there. But if we are, say, in the moment, present moment, going back to our little dishes, we're in the present moment, we're thoroughly and completely enjoying, a lunch meal in the middle of a holiday time period, and we're really appreciating said dishes, and we're appreciating the experience. We are more fully there, and that sense of appreciation, that sense of gratitude, all of those are qualities of love. If we're sitting there, at a big holiday gathering, we've pulled out our dishes, and we have, huge families there and kids running around, and we're sitting there worrying about what can happen. What would happen if this precious, treasured set of dishes, if a piece breaks and it's come down generationally, what will happen? Oh my goodness, the set will be incomplete. We are so busy in our head being concerned, in fear and in doubt, that we're not actually enjoying the people, the food, the dishes, the experience, the time, the holiday, anything. There's no love there. There's fear, there's doubt. So where detachment, again, as I say, this is a tool that will help us uncover the love. It's not necessarily something where you say, well, when we talk about forgiveness, we have the forgiveness, we have the love. We can more easily see how those two intertwine. Detachment is kind of the beginning part to help us uncover the love that's innately there. And that's why I said, early on in my life, it was a great way to begin to understand love, I wasn't necessarily focusing on love at first when I was thinking about detachment. But as I detached more from things, I had more experience with these people, places, and things. And the more that experience blossomed, the more appreciation, gratitude, forgiveness, love, the more I enjoyed things just for what they were rather than what I had previously tried to make them be or not be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I see. Those dishes have got a lot to answer for, haven't they?
Yes, they do. And I'm actually very grateful that was part of a circumstance in my life. Um, you know, well, another one that I actually referenced in one of my books. I grew up in a household where my father, enjoyed keeping cars a certain way, and I remember, back in my early childhood, that he had bought, for his first new car, and back then in that time period, it was very common for people to put clear plastic covers on the seats. So my father immediately did that, and I remember being in the hot south of the U.S. and, no air conditioning back in those days. And, those little seats left little, designs and imprints on us, and they were miserably hot. And I also remember that when it came time years later to turn the car over and get a new one, the person who received the new one had brand new seats, because the moment you took those plastic covers off, here were these incredibly beautiful seats in this old car. So what was the benefit? We never had the fullness of the experience of the car with the way it was. And of course, make somewhat of fun of these things. There's nothing wrong with protecting certain things or, trying to keep them in great shape, what have you. But it depends on whether or not we're coming from fear. In other words, our decisions are we having the fullness of this experience or not? And that is where attachment and detachment really comes into play. And what we'll find is that fear and doubt motivate the attachment. When we remove the attachment, fear and doubt go away. That's when love reveals itself, because then we're just having the experience for the experience.
Okay, yeah, all right. Good metaphors, anyway.
And good experiences.
Yeah. All right, thanks very much, Harold.